one. Hi, we're here today, cleverly changing, and Janus Adams, and it is, we're both at home, and it's a great day to be together. And hi, how are you?
Hi, I am doing well.
Yeah, we have been talking, you and I, about just some of the frustration that we've been hearing with people not really seeming to take the census seriously. I don't know why that is. What do you think?
I think it's a lack of knowledge. I think people just don't know what the census is. They know people are counting, but they don't know why.
Well, the why is that constitutionally since 1790 we've had to do a census every 10 years. It's in the Constitution. That said, there is so much that's in the Constitution that doesn't seem to always get done, that maybe that contributes to people not taking it seriously. But I really think we should, and especially now, while so much is at stake in terms of congressional districts, in terms of who gets to represent those districts, in terms of, at least under the present system, whether or not African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, people of color in general are properly counted. And that's really what is at issue right now with this census. And also, it just seems to me this thing of, even if we have been through these periods when we were not counted, it doesn't mean that one should not stand up and be counted for themselves.
I think that's interesting that you say that because the first census I remember, I was in high school. Before that, I don't recall the census, but I do know that the census is for everyone in your household, including infants. So
Yes.
I think there comes some just confusion about who should be put on the census. So most people should have gotten a letter in the mail with a code so that they can put it into their computer and log on to fill out the information. And then it lists people that live in your house. So even if a baby is in the house, a baby is a person, and they should be added to the census as well, correct?
Absolutely. And, I'll tell you just a story about my own family, because every year my husband and I noticed that we were both really depressed around Christmas time, and we couldn't figure it out. And finally, one day I said to him out of the blue, I just said, "When did your brother die?" And it turned out his brother died at Christmas time. My father died January 4th. And we realized that so much was, that so much of our patterns were being really conditioned by that loss. But I never knew his brother. His brother died when he was a little boy. Fast forward many, many years, I'm doing research about nothing in particular, not relating to family. And I realized the kind of information that's really in the census, because I'd participated, but I'd never really looked it up to see how, how our family was or anything else. I look it up, and I begin to look up then both of our families, his family, my family, and I go back 10 years at a time to each census, and all of a sudden his brother appears. His brother, who died when he was 12, he was a real person that I might not have been able to know saying, "Hi, Alfonso," but I got to meet and to feel his presence because he was there. His name, his age, his place of birth. He was a real person on the census. And I just think that that was so touching to my family and to me. My children had never met him. He was just kind of a presence that we'd heard about, but he became a real person whose life mattered and was counted, even though he died at 12 years old. when we saw him on the census. So I think about the census in that way, but I also think about the census, um, in other ways, more societally. How do you think about it? What's your first thing?
So for me, when I think about the census, I'm often drawn to the past of my ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
So you brought up the story about your husband's brother, and I think about those records that are in the courthouse. So when I'm interested in researching my family's past and who, came before me, we go to the courthouse and we begin to look at those records.
Yeah.
And the more records that are kept and the more information that is gathered from the census, the more information we can know later on. So I'm able to know who my grandmother and grandmother's grandmother and her great grandmother and her great
Yes.
great great grandmother because of the census. So
Because
it's like it can give us the gift of our past, but it
yes.
also helps to draw districts. So when we think about
Yes.
politics, when we think about funding for certain communities, those are things that come into play when I think about the census.
Absolutely. School funding. When we hear the word gerrymandering all the time, which means playing funny numbers as to who gets represented and shifting districts around. Um, but all of that is rooted in the census. And the fact of represented districts, duly represented districts, is how we get to elect the people who will be respectful of us and mindful of our positions and points of views, our needs, whatever that is. Right now, we're going through an infinite crisis that, yes, could have been anticipated, but was not, except in a conceptual way, but is now an absolute fact. And what is happening all over the country is rooted right now in the past few elections. How we are dealing with those problems are rooted in the last few elections, and how those elections were counted is based on the census. You know, so we just Benjamin Franklin said, you that you get the best government that he said, I'm not quoting it accurately right now, but you get the best government you're willing to fight for. And that is what it is. I also think of the census in really racial terms, because we have all heard the term, three-fifths a man. And as African Americans, we know that that was used and meant to demean our presence. But I don't know how many people realize that the genesis of that was the census. In the first constitutional convention, they were looking to balance the numbers between the North and the South. In the North, where there were fewer enslaved people, not none, but fewer enslaved people, the North just wanted it to be based on, quote, citizens, which meant white men. The South, knowing that their numbers were hugely inflated by not only women who could not vote, but all of these African American people who could not vote. And at that point, Blacks were considering themselves African. These African people who could not vote. The South was still determined to say, well, we have more people than you do, even though they were not valuing those people in any other way than a commercial one. The compromise that they came to for the purpose of representation of northern white states versus southern white states was three-fifths a man. That Black people, for the purpose of inflating the numbers of the South and the pushback from the North on that, the compromise by these white men of privilege was to decide that blacks would only be counted as 3/5 a human being. So the South was able to increase its power through totally ill-gotten gain of how many people they got to enslave. The North was diminished in that power, even though it too was enslaving people, but it did not have as many. And that is something that we are still struggling with to this day. But that is the genesis of 3/5 a man, and it goes straight to the census. I think when I think of that, I think of all of the Black people who literally had to put their lives on the line for basic human rights in the United States. Those people are our families. They matter to us whether they were counted fully or not. And I cannot understand demeaning them in our own sights by not respecting all they went through and participating in voting, participating in the census, and raising our voices and having our voices heard whenever that opportunity comes our way.
Wow. I mean, you really just unpacked so much in what you're sharing with us. I think to know that in the past they were only counted as 3/5 human, and now today we're being counted as whole people, which we have always been, but that definitely does encourage us to say, look, it is important to be counted, to stand up and be counted. And
Yes.
I think it's also important because there is that correlation between voting and what we're
Exactly.
dealing with. There's a direct parallel between the two. And so to hear the history of it and see the correlation between then and now is something. What would you say to someone who doesn't fully understand the importance of the census, and they may think, oh, well, right now we're going through a pandemic. I don't have time to worry about, the census. And in fact, it only takes like a minute or two. It's like something very quick. It's not even a long survey. It's very quick and not
No,
time invasive.
it is very quick, but I don't care if it took 5 hours. The issue is, how do you respect yourself? Do you respect yourself? And that's all it's about. It's about valuing yourself. And whatever it takes to do right by yourself, that's what we have to do. There is no equivocation on doing right by yourself. You get up in the morning, you physically have to take care of yourself. If you have children, you physically have to take care of your children. You have elders, you physically have to take care of your elders. But there are many other things that we have to do in order to take care of ourselves and those we love. And the census and voting are part of that. If you do not vote right now, then you are allowing other people who don't have your best interests at heart to make deals that don't respect you. If you don't deal with the census so that the voting districts include you numerically, then you are allowing other districts that don't have your best interest in mind to decide how they're going to value you. Are we really going to let people who don't have our best interests in mind make the kind of deals they've made for years that say we are 3/5 or 4/5 or 1/5, or how the devil do you put a fifth on a person? And yet, when you have people who see themselves making deals on using you as a widget to make compromises and bargains that they know will never impact their lives negatively in the way it impacts yours. So that is what's at stake here. So yes, it's even right now in how medical treatment is being allotted.
Mm.
Really, it is.
Yes.
Because we don't have testing. So medical treatment is being allocated on the basis of who speaks the loudest, but it's also being done on the basis of, you know, areas that are more heavily populated, which we know because of life patterns and because of the last census. Those areas may not get all the attention they need, but everybody knows that because of the higher concentration of people there, it is more likely that they're going to have greater need. And so the energy has to go there. But it also has to go, in my case, to upstate New York. It has to go to rural areas. And that allocation is really being done on the basis of population, and population is defined by the census.
Well, folks, you've heard it right here. If you don't know where to go to take the census, the website is 2020census.gov. That's 2020 census, census.gov.
Yes, and if you don't, I mean, obviously anybody watching us right now has access to a computer, to a device. But if you know someone who doesn't, or if you know someone who has maybe a flip phone, not um, a, a smartphone,
Smartphone.
yes, then that is another way in which we can help each other. We can reach out and ask if that person needs to use one of our devices in order to take the census and be counted. That is another way of saying, I love you, you matter to me. And that is something that we all have to be doing and saying, it's so critical now, it always was, but now we know we can't survive without it. So we're talking census, but really we're talking caring for ourselves and each other.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the census and educating us. I know I learned something new, and I think the census definitely means more to me now than it did before. It was something that I did take part in, but I didn't necessarily feel connected with it. And after our conversation today, I definitely feel connected with the whole process. So thank you
Yes.
for giving us that.
Thank you for asking about that. It was a casual conversation we had, and here we are now. And hopefully it will reach other people and resonate, and they will go to 2020census.gov, stand up and be counted.
Thank you. Can you tell everybody a little bit about maybe one of your books and where they can purchase them?
Oh, thank you for asking. Well, this year is the 20th anniversary of my book, Sister Days, which was a herstory of African American women. Sister Days, 365 inspired moments in African American women's history. And if you go to my website, janusadams.com, that'll show up. You'll see that on a landing page in a little bit before we go. But if you go to janusadams.com for an order from my website, I'll send you an autographed copy. You can also get it online at all of the main bookstores, but if you buy it from my website, you will get an autographed copy. You'll also be able to download the First Lady's quiz that is a fun way to share and get additional insight into the extraordinary history of African American women. So thank you for asking.
It's interesting that you say that, because a lot of people may not know that April is actually Black Women's History Month. So it's
Wow,
perfect that
yes.
you have that quiz for us as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning it. You know, we've had Black History Month in February, Women's History Month in March, African American Women's History Month in April, but let's face it, every month is our month. Keep it going.
Yes, 365 days of the year.
365 days a year. And for our daughters and for our elders, you know, it is just so important that we honor ourselves. You know, I'm going to read something just very quickly from my book, Glory Days, which was the first one that I did. And this little section is about why I wrote the book. And it says, rooted in three specific events, Glory Days pays homage to three specific gifts: history, heritage, and hope. One day, a group of my friends were discussing the growing racism, possible ways to overcome it, the problems of how to achieve it in spite of all, and how to survive it. I watched as our host's father began to hang his head in sorrow, mourning the notion that, as he said, his generation had done so little, he said, to ensure that our generation would not have to suffer this pain. We tried to tell him that this wasn't so. We tried to soothe his pain as he had tried to soothe ours. But Mr. Bailey didn't and couldn't know all that his generation had really done. He had never had the privilege of studying African American history. In a very real sense, therefore, he didn't know what he was missing. He is a man who enjoys building things, but he did not know to what extent Blacks had truly built this very country. He did not know that the term slave labor, for example, must be translated. What it really refers to are the inventions, the skills, the craft of people who were enslaved. That's what it means. Because Blacks were not considered American citizens, once again, the issue of the census, not considered citizens until the passage of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution in 1868, the courts held that Black people could not enter into contracts. And thus, for 250 years of invention, of knowledge, of skill, we could not legally take credit for our accomplishments. But that does not mean that does not make those contributions something that we did not accomplish. And you know, even though we may have lived in a country that bartered our well-being in what was legal, they may have invented the government, but they did not invent human life. And so, in valuing our lives, we have to know more about ourselves. So, just because it wasn't recorded by people who wanted to demean us doesn't mean that we did not accomplish a great deal. Instead, what it means is that Eli Whitney's slave did not get the credit he or she deserved for working on the cotton gin in 1794. Cyrus McCormick did acknowledge that his slave, the man he enslaved, named Joe Anderson, quote, helped to build the Reaper in 1831, but Anderson's name could not appear on the patent. Because these contributions are not recognized to this day, and because of the denial of ongoing Black achievement that still plagues us in this contemporary world, Mr. Bailey did not know all that his peers and their forebears had really done. Thus, this book, Glory Days, was written to recognize this unrecognized history, honoring women inventors, the unknown enslaved collaborators of the major inventions of the 18th and 19th century, and honoring all those whose gifts of spirit and invention have bettered our lives every day of the year. Glory Days also owes a debt to the eternal question posed by a line from a spiritual: how we got over. How did we do it? How did we get over? For answers, we must know our history. And from our history, we will learn that centuries, millennia of our fathers and mothers of invention in every field, from business to religion, literature, and sport, have provided a serious legacy for us. You know, often I look back at all of this, and for us, for centuries as African Americans, we have been portrayed as slaves, as though the shame of those who would enslave us could take the measure of our lives. We have been segregated and villainized as less than, as though the blindness of those who would mock us could share the vision of all we survey. We have known the depths of our despair, and yet we have lifted ourselves and our world up through the legacies of our past and the promise of our future. We have infused our world with the wonder of all our glory days. And when our ongoing story of accomplishment is revealed through these 365 inspired moments and so many others, we rejoice in the knowledge of all we have done. And all of these vast achievements can now help us to build better worlds for ourselves and others. Congratulations. We are the descendants of Africans enslaved. Congratulations, all ye Asian American, African American, Indigenous American, European American, all of us, all people of every hue and ability, everyone who respects the rights of others. Congratulations. Do you know what a mighty people we are?
Beautiful. So on that note, I would like to say, follow Dr. Adams on her website at janusadams.com. And also, can you tell everyone your Instagram handle and also your Twitter handle as well?
And follow my friend on her website, cleverlychanging.com. And she'll tell you her handles. Mine are Janus Adams on Twitter, Janus Adams on Facebook. It gets a little redundant. Janus Adams on LinkedIn. And on Instagram, I'm Janus Adams Author.
Awesome. And you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and also on YouTube at Cleverly Changing. On Twitter, that is the one that's different. It's Cleverly Changing without the G on the end. So we look forward to connecting with you in the future. If you ever have any show topics you wanted us to cover, please send us a message in one of our DMs or send us a private message on Facebook. We look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us today. And it's a Thanksgiving Day. We get to be together.
Yes. All right. Bye.
Bye. Okay, let's consider this the end. I heard, did a voice come in? So we'll just leave that. Was that David?
Yes.
Okay. We'll just tell him he's now infamous. On his own show, he's famous. On ours, he's infamous.
Okay. Right. I think he thought we were done.
We should have been by now. Our devices and platforms didn't want us to be. But are you good with that?
Yeah, I think it's perfect. I'm glad we did it.
Oh, let's just hope it's still saying recording. So as soon as I get it, I'm going to send it off to you, and we can both we can both just see what we got, you know?
Yes.
And this was great.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.